Coming up, Rosetta finally makes it to 67p.
SpaceX settles in Texas.
And we have a live interview with Peter Beck of Rocket Labs USA. Stay tuned. Tomorrow begins now.
Oh, it's beautiful, Mike. Got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and
Private space station.
And welcome to Tomorrow, episode 7.24 for August 9th, 2014. My name is Benjamin Higginbotham. With me, as always, is the beautiful, lovely, wonderful, and talented Carrie Ann Higginbotham. We'll be your hosts for this episode. Now, before we get started, we did want to give a huge thank you to all of the patrons of Tomorrow. These are the people who have contributed at least $10 to this specific segment of this episode. Notice the list keeps getting longer and longer. That is super freaking awesome. We recently just got our pass through our last Patreon goal, and we are on fire to hit our next goal. And by the way, before we get into the show, the goals are kind of up for grabs. So the $1,000 and the $1,500 markers, if you have better ideas for those goals, please let us know. There's some great conversation happening on our Reddit channel, our Reddit subreddit, Reddit/r/TMRO. Also, if you're a patron of Tomorrow on Reddit, let us know and we'll give you a little patron flair. It's pretty cool, pretty freaking cool. All right, let's go ahead and get started with some space news. Check this out. Rosetta finally reached Comet 67p. I'm not going to try to pronounce that. Those are high-res images from, what is it, like like 60 miles. What's the distance? 96 kilometers or so ahead of the nucleus of it. And there are more images, Dutta. Just keep going. Like the next one. There you go. Yeah, absolutely. So these are all taken a couple days apart. The first one was like today. Rosetta reached it at August 6th at 0900 hours Universal Time, and man, this has been going on for like 10 years. Check that out. So it's a high-res image of the surface of this comet, and it looks a lot like the moon, I think. Right? Yeah. It's missing like all the ice, all the things we thought it was going to have. Right. It looks totally different than we thought it was going to. So we're going to be able to do some pretty amazing. We being humanity, specifically ESA, the European Space Agency, is going to be able to do some pretty amazing science based on what they have here. Check this out. Anytime Rosetta sends back imagery or anything else, they have to wait 22 minutes for telemetry because it's currently 245 million miles away. I should have converted that to kilometers. I'm a terrible human being. I'm sorry. That was a $1.7 billion spacecraft. And if all goes well, November of this year, there's going to be a lander that pops off and will land on the surface and will actually gather imagery and more data that way. That's going to be really freaking cool. And that's slated for later this year, November of this year. November 11th, there you go. So yeah, that's going to be freaking awesome. All right, moving right along. SpaceX launched Asia Sat 8. Check it out.
3, 2, 1. Liftoff.
Now, that was a communications satellite for AsiaSat. Then, in fact, the next satellite that SpaceX is going to launch on Falcon 9, which is like less than 20 days away at this point, will be AsiaSat 6, also part of the same constellation. The neat thing about this particular launch was the pad turnaround time. So they're at Space Launch Complex 40 in Cape Canaveral. Now, for the last 20 years or so, no one has been able to turn a launch that quickly at the same launch pad.
Right, which is an important note because some things have been turned around very quickly, but it's because it was one pad and then launching again on another pad.
Correct. So looking at this was a 22-day turnaround from the previous launch. And that was an Orbcomm launch. So Orbcomm launched, and then 22 days later, AsiaSat 8 launched. The previous record at the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, the previous record was 34 days on the same pad within the last 10 years or so, right? Within the last decade. And that record was also held by SpaceX.
Yes.
Now, the previous record to that was actually on pad 17A, and that was 17B, and that was 41 days. Then we have pad 41, which is the it's either the Atlas or Delta pad, I don't remember which, and that's 42 days. And then we've got pad 17A, which is 53 days, pad 37, which is 72 days in between launches. So if you look at the Atlas and Delta, they're basically 42 days and 72 days in between. So 42 days would be the Atlas launch. So 41 is Atlas and 37 is Delta 4. That's 72 days in between launches. And SpaceX has that down to 22, soon to be 21, hopefully. Now, that is not the fastest ever at Cape Canaveral. That actually belongs to Gemini 6 and 7 at Space Launch Complex 19, although back in the day it was actually just known as Launch Complex 19.
Right.
And that happened with an 11-day turnaround, and it technically...
Unbelievable.
So it was less than that, really.
Right,
so it was
right.
11-day turnaround from launch to launch, but the pad was actually ready before then because they had to, they had a test, or they had an abort on one of the launches. So it was actually a faster turnaround than 11 days. Now, in all fairness, it was a slightly smaller rocket, so not as complex, but still 11-day turnaround. Challenge SpaceX.
Wow.
Turn that pad in 10 days. I can turn that pad in 10 days. That's the...
I'm like, turn that pad. That reminds me of.
A little bit.
Goodness.
That next launch of AsiaSat 6 is slated for August 25th. Speaking of SpaceX, they've officially selected, for realsies, there's been rumors about this.
No, I think technically there's still some paperwork that needs to be signed.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's like one sheet that's like somebody needs
I don't
to
know.
do, but I'm pretty
Everywhere
sure it's
I've
like
heard-
still one.
Everywhere I've heard, it's like, this is for realsies now.
Right.
SpaceX has selected Brownsville for its next launch site. Here's approximately what it'll look. I mean, they're done, right? I mean, you see the Falcon Heavy on the pad.
Yeah, I mean, there it
You see
is.
there it is.
I mean,
right
why
there.
isn't anyone talking about this, you
So
guys?
this is an artist rendition of what it will look like. And actually, to give you an idea as to where this is at the very tip point. So there's Texas, right? So there you can kind of see the outline of Texas at the very, very bottom. And if we zoom in even one more time, we can check out. So it's like the tippy end of Texas, and then the tippy end of that.
Yeah, it's almost the most southern point of Texas. I mean, it is basically the most southern point of Texas, that right on the water, if that makes any sense.
And that's kind of an outline of what that's all going to look like with the launch site and the hangars and kind of the launch complex. So that's kind of exciting. It's going to be in Boca Chica Village. It's near Brownsville. It's not in Brownsville. And this has been a long time. We've been talking about this for a while. There were certain sites up for grabs. This was always kind of the forerunner, it felt like. And now they've really made it official.
I mean, it makes sense. It's along the same latitude as Florida, where Cape is and what have you. There's a lot of rocket testing that's done in Texas. Although somebody said, "Oh, it's much closer." Like, Texas is gigantic. Texas
is huge.
Much like California, should be at least 2 different states.
Or
like it's
4.
It's so huge. And to say it's like, oh well, I mean, it's in the same state, so it's a lot closer. It's
like a
closer-ish, but
everywhere else it would be a state or 2 apart.
Yes. So
anyhow, this is the world's first commercial launch complex designed specifically for orbital missions. You got to put the qualifier on the end because we do have Spaceport America, which is designed for suborbital, and that's already been built.
Right.
But for orbital missions, for low Earth orbit, geotransfer orbit, stuff like that, this is the first one. Commercial space or spaceport designed specifically for that. This is also the first time SpaceX has gotten a launch pad and have had to build it from scratch. Right? Space Launch Complex 4E, they built up on top of the old Titan pad.
Right.
Space Launch Complex 40 on top of an old Titan pad. They seem to like the Titans. Space Complex Space Complex 39A, the old space shuttle pad / Apollo pad. All of that infrastructure already there.
Yeah,
there's like nothing there. This is like just land. And so they're going to have to build the pad from scratch.
My understanding is that there aren't even really people there, which is good because you don't want to be
people.
building on top of people. But when we say there's nothing there, like there's nothing there.
So it'll be cool. It'll be cool. So hopefully we'll start to see something come out of that fairly soon. All right, moving right along. United Launch Alliance, we talked about the RD-180 engine and how there were sanctions against the engine and maybe they get the engine, maybe they wouldn't. Well, it sounds like, although it's not definitive yet, it sounds like not an issue at all. They're going to get their engines.
Right.
So here's just a random test firing of an RD-180.
It's beautiful.
It is kind of cool.
So gorgeous.
But basically, August 20th, I believe it is.
Yeah, Mark Peller was most recently on a panel during the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics Space Conference of 2014, and he said that at our level, this is a quote, "At our level, it's business as usual," unquote. Which is kind of crazy as far as I'm concerned. But Peller said that RD Amros, which is a joint venture of the engine's Moscow area manufacturer, NPO Ergomash, and United Technologies Corp., which is out of Connecticut. They're an RD-180 reseller, and they've signed a contract earlier this year that will get ULA 29 engines through 2017. The first 2 of that batch are expected August 20th, so later on this month, with 3 more being delivered in October, and then 8 scheduled engines from 2015. It seems like 8 engines a year from 2015, 2016,
Right.
2017.
So if we get the
etc.
engines on August 20th,
Right.
then it's a non-issue, right?
Pretty much.
So then, well, it should be a non-issue, right? Russia could at any time say, no, you can't have our engines.
Right.
But realistically, they're likely going to get the engines, and it was all just political maneuvering, and Atlas V is fine. If they don't get the engines on the 20th, and there's just this indefinite delay, the future of Atlas V is in doubt at that point.
Very scary. Aerojet Rocketdyne has said that they're designing an alternative engine that could be flight ready in 4 years.
Which I still don't understand. We made it from nothing to the moon in like 9 years.
I don't know.
Like 8 years.
I don't know.
Or 7 years. How did we...
I don't know. I don't know.
Anyhow.
Why
different
we can't
mentality. It's a different time. I get it. So, all right.
Can't we just like back technology that thing like?
Yeah, sure. All right, moving right along. On June 28th, we talked about the low-density supersonic accelerator.
Yeah.
There's actually a brand new video that they posted. Check this out. So this is video of, so this is the high-def, much cleaned-up imagery from the, now you see the lens cap pop off. You're going to see that, boom, it did a little inflation. But so that footage we saw before. What we hadn't seen is this. This is the high-definition slow motion camera that shows you as it's accelerating. This is designed to help increase the surface area of a spacecraft as it's entering someplace, for example, Mars. And here we go. We had also talked about how the parachutes didn't deploy correctly. So here we have cameras showing exactly what happened. So that's the parachute, like the drogue. You can actually see as everything kind of comes up, and we're going to see here everything's going to go out. It's going to release, and you're going to see as the parachute gets caught and tears. So give it just a moment here, and boom, it immediately inflates and begins tearing. Boom, and tearing. Now you'll see it get worse real fast, and you can actually see what happened to the new test parachute. That was a test. Now, sad, sucks that the parachute didn't work, but we got data back, and this was a test article, and that's great data for them to get.
Yeah, that's
and so
huge.
now they've got 2 more tests coming June of 2015 that they'll be able to use that data for and try to fix the issues and get it going. So on test articles, this is when you want to see these issues, right?
Right, because you don't want to
this
say,
is the time.
hey, it all worked perfectly. That was super awesome. Worked perfectly. Crap, now we're in a real mission. We have an issue. We've never seen it before. What do we do?
Exactly. So this is the time you want to see those issues. This is the time you want to fix that stuff. So great. That's really cool, and I thought it was really beautiful footage, actually. The Alliant Tech Systems 5-segment solid rocket booster has passed the critical design review for the Space Launch System. Now, check this out, this video. This is a 5-segment solid rocket booster from about this is from the Constellation program. We'll just voice over it, Dutta, so you can go ahead and play it. And then big, huge fire.
Yeah.
This goes on for about 2 minutes because it's much like the Space Shuttle booster, but it has an additional 5th segment. Now, like I said, this was actually designed for Constellation, and then its future was kind of in question when Constellation was canceled. But then Ares 5 will be using solid motors, and it'll actually be using these, and it did pass that critical design review. Now that it's done that, it can begin its qualification testing. And qualification motor 1, or QM1, is it's slated to be test fired late 2014, early 2015. So a little bit later this year, early next year sometime. And then after that, the next major milestone is going to be the design certification review, and that's expected in fall of 2016. Speaking of SLS, there are a few additional milestones. We've got the modified RS-25 engine. That's the modified space shuttle engine. It's going to be firing this fall. We're going to have the opening of the Space Launch System Vertical Assembly Center, and of course we're going to have Orion's maiden flight. Now, speaking of Orion, I'm going faster because we're running out of time. Speaking of Orion, Orion is the spacecraft that sits on top of the Space Launch System.
Yes.
It's T0. It now has a T0 date. It's set for 13:03 Universal Time on December 4th, 2014.
Nice.
It's been in development for nearly, get this, 10 years. That's a decade of development on this thing. Now, That's not fault of Orion per se. What happened was this was actually back in the Constellation era. This was the Crew Exploration Vehicle, or CEV, and it was supposed to launch on top of an Ares 1.
Right.
Oh, the Ares 1 had problems, and the amount it was supposed to be able to lift kept getting smaller, and then so they had to keep ripping mass off of Orion, and so Apollo on this was a massively huge vehicle. It actually ended up literally getting smaller by half of a meter.
Right.
So the whole spacecraft had to shrink half a meter, which is not a small amount.
Yeah.
So the diameter is half a meter smaller now. Just in the Constellation program, this had to happen. They had to rip tons of mass off in order to get to work on the Ares 1, and then, lo and behold, Ares 1 gets canceled. So this is what we end up with. After 10 years of development, they're like, this is what we have, and this is supposed to enable beyond Earth orbit, or BO, like Leo, beyond Earth orbit exploration of the stars. This is sending humans beyond where we've gone for the last 30 some odd years.
All right.
So there are only 2 missions for this. Exploration Flight Test 1, and that's coming up soonish. Well, December 4th, 2014. And EM2, which is Exploration Mission 2, and that's going to see Orion bring astronauts. See what I did there? Astronauts to a captured asteroid.
Wow.
All right. So when we come back, we're going to have a live interview with Peter Beck, who is the CEO and founder of Rocket Lab USA. Really cool stuff. Small payloads, like 1 meter rocket, sending stuff to orbit. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Look into her face, determination in her eyes. She won't give up or quit or fall for little fashion lies. Filled on some expectation. This girl's a fascination. And nothing in her way will keep her from her destination. 'Cause she's fire walking. She's fire walking. When it's hot, she keeps on moving. Her heat keeps on improving. Yeah, she's fire walking. She's fire walking to be free.
Welcome back to Tomorrow. I'd like to thank all of the patrons of Tomorrow who have helped to make this specific episode of Tomorrow happen. These are the people who have contributed at least $5 to this specific episode. Without you, we wouldn't be able to continue to do this week after week. A huge thank you to all of our patrons. You can learn more information on how to become a patron of Tomorrow at patreon.com/TMRO. We are a crowdfunded show, and every single dollar helps. All right, let's go ahead and get started with the second segment here. We actually have a live guest on this week. We're joined by Peter Beck, who is the CEO and founder of Rocket Labs USA. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Benjamin.
So tell me a little bit about Rocket Lab USA. You're fairly new. I don't think a lot of people have heard of you yet. What are you guys doing?
Well, we actually started in 2007 in New Zealand, and we started off down there doing sounding rockets. And in 2009, we became the first private company in the Southern Hemisphere to reach space. Then following that, we won a number of DARPA contracts and demonstrated a new kind of propulsion system called a viscous liquid monopropellant, which stores like a solid but is controllable like a liquid. And then also various Lockheed Martin and Aerojet Rocketdyne work. And then about this time last year, actually, we decided that we'd built up enough credibility and capability to go and do what we really wanted to do, which was build a small orbital launch vehicle. And we raised a Series A round out of Silicon Valley, and we're working hard to get to our first launch next year.
Let's talk about this new vehicle a little bit. You call it the Electron Rocket. What's unique about this rocket that's different than other rockets?
Well, I guess we started this rocket from a clean sheet of paper. So the first thing we did was look at the issues with trying to create a low-cost launch system. And one of the big issues is, of course, launch and range. So we decided that instead of doing it in the United States, we were going to do it in New Zealand, where we're all from. But the advantage of New Zealand is it's a small island nation in the middle of the Pacific, with relatively no air traffic, no marine traffic, good orbital launch azimuths, and nothing to hit until Chile. So it was really a great place to do launch.
Next.
So what we did is we the last 20 years of weather at our launch site, and that formed the basis of our structural margins and our TVC authorities, so that we can launch 95% of the time of the year, and that's where we started from. So I guess what's unique about the launch system is it's designed from scratch, absolutely everything. There's no heritage hardware in there whatsoever, and it's designed to be a frequently launched small satellite launcher.
And
there's a number of...
How small of a satellite?
110 kilograms to a 500 kilometer sun synchronous orbit.
And you're doing some unique things with structures as well, right? A traditional rocket's aircraft aluminum or something along those lines, but you're not doing that. What are you doing? Yeah,
so, I mean, our history has always been carbon composites. We've actually never built a rocket case or a propellant tank out of metallics. We've only ever built them out of carbon composite. So for us, it was a natural progression to build the whole launch vehicle out of carbon composites. That obviously throws up some real challenges when you're working with cryogenic liquid oxygen, but those challenges we've been able to meet and succeed. So it reduces a lot of mass out of the vehicle, and we produced the first stage tank on a mandrel we've dubbed the mega mandrel, and we basically pop a tank off one mandrel in a couple of days. So it's a very mass-produced way of producing very high-performance composite tanks.
So to clarify, you're saying that it only takes a couple of days to build the tank for one of your stages. Is that correct?
Yeah. For the first stage tank, it's a couple of days.
That's pretty cool. And using carbon composites as well. Actually, we had Dave Maston of Maston Space Systems on a few weeks ago, and he talked about some of the challenges there because composites do not like super cooled anything or super hot anything. So that in and of itself is a pretty big challenge to overcome as well.
Certainly is. Yep. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of issues that we had to overcome with micro cracking and oxygen compatibility. But like I say, I mean, we've only ever worked with composites, and we're lucky to have New Zealand, which is a very strong industry in high performance composites. If you look at the America's Cup boats and things like that, so yeah, it's been a challenge, but we're pretty confident we're there.
Now, one of the unique things about your rocket is that it's actually end to end. You own the whole thing. You've got the engines, the tanks, all of it. And the engines are traditional, I believe it was rocket propellant 1 and liquid oxygen, if I remember right, or at least highly refined kerosene. But you just talked earlier about how you actually had a different kind of fuel that you had developed earlier. Why not use that fuel for the Rutherford engine?
That's a very good question. And the answer is, so that the viscous liquid monopropellant was really supposed to be the silver bullet for reducing cost in propulsion. But as it turned out, it's not the silver bullet. It's really expensive, but from a tactical point of view, it's really useful. So it's not useful for a small launch vehicle. And I guess Rocket Lab, we've played with hybrids, we've played with liquids, we've played with solids, we've played with viscous liquid monopropellants. So for us, it was really not an emotional decision about which propulsion system to use. It was, what is the best propulsion system to get the job done? And that was liquid oxygen and RP1.
And it's a real propulsion system. We're actually looking at an image right now of, I believe this was on your blog, one of the test firings of this engine. So you actually are creating fire with the engine. This isn't a paper engine. This is a real engine that's firing right now.
Absolutely, yep. No, we're running that motor about once every 2 weeks.
So, and then you said, I'm sorry, maybe you didn't give a time frame. How long until you think you'll be able to fly the rocket itself into space?
So we're aiming for our first orbital shot at the end of 2015.
And so what's the delay right now? What would get you to go faster? Maybe end of 2014, although that's a bit insane. But what's the thing that's holding you back from being able to launch faster?
Well, building an orbital launch vehicle is really hard. There's a lot of elements in there. It's not just a propulsion system. There's tanks and structures, avionics, GNC, launch pad infrastructure. Really, to do it in 2 years, most people think we're nuts. So I think I don't think we can push that one any harder than that.
Where do you go from here, right? So you've got this is a 1 meter fairing, right? This is a 1 meter in diameter system. Do you envision a larger, say, 4 or 5 meter version of this in the future? What's the plan moving into 2020? Not
at all. So let me sort of circle back on the whole ethos of what we're trying to do here. So there's two fundamental elements that you need to achieve to be able to commercialize space. So the first is cost. And we don't believe in cost per kilogram. We believe in the total amount of cost total amount of capital that you have to go and raise to become a space business. So although like a Falcon 9, its cost per kilogram is much more competitive than ours, you've still got to go and raise $60 million if you want to go where you want to go, when you want to go. So what we're about is getting that down to a small enough amount that you can feasibly go and raise some capital to go and create your own space business.
And how much would I have to raise? So I want to launch something.
4.9.
So $5 million US, correct? And I can launch. You said about a little over 100 kilograms into low Earth orbit, correct? All the way up.
Sun synchronous. So basically, for the same price as a ride share, you get to go where you want to go, when you want to go.
So that's pretty cool. That could be a potential game changer because that $5 million price point. Actually, you mentioned the Falcon 9. Prior to the Falcon 9, they had the Falcon 1, which was much similar in spec, although even that was more expensive than what you're offering right here. So what's the secret sauce to keep your price down? Or do you not want to give away your secret sauce on a broadcast?
Well, I mean, I still want to circle back on, because I think I mentioned that there's two key elements here, and it's not just cost, it's responsiveness. So without one or the other, you can't commercialize space. So when I say responsiveness, what I mean is that if you've got to wait a year to get launched, then the launch may as well be free, because you still can't be really commercial in business. If you look at all the large constellations in history, the Iridiums, the global stars, they've all been sort of 6 to 8 years to generate any revenue and gone bankrupt. So unless you fix that problem, the cost problem is largely irrelevant too. So we set ourselves a goal, and that was why we started off with a clean sheet of paper and why we went back to weather, when we're designing the vehicle. We need to be able to launch once a week. And once you've got that sort of service to space, at that sort of price point, then you can start to do some really interesting things.
And you will be launching because you're in the U.S. right now. I mean, you physically are in the U.S. right now. Will you be launching from the U.S. at all, or will you be almost entirely in New Zealand? Where's your launch platform going to be?
Here's the thing. It's really easy to build a rocket in America. It's really hard to launch it. It's really hard to build a rocket in New Zealand, but it's really easy to launch it. And in America, the common solution for launching is to do air launch, and that's not without its issues. It's much nicer to just walk up to something on the ground, give it a hug and a kiss, and send it on its way, than all the logistics of air launch. So for us, if we want to reach our one launch a week target, then that's why we had to be based in a country where we could launch at that sort of frequency.
So would you have, I don't want to say development, but production in one country and launch in another, or would you have all of it combined? How would that work?
Yeah, so definitely. So we'll have some production up here in the US where there's an industrial base to meet our requirements, some down in New Zealand, but ultimately we'll launch down in New Zealand. But we also do intend to launch out of the US as well, but we'll struggle to reach the same price point. That's the only issue with that.
Now, I'll tell you why we're excited about it, because we see all these Kickstarter campaigns and even these smaller companies like Planetary Resources with these small nanosats and even microsats that want to get up into space. And as you mentioned, if you want to be the primary payload on anything, yeah, your price per kilogram may be low on a Falcon 9, but the price to get into space is still $60 to $100 million. Whereas if I now want to create a Kickstarter campaign, it's not unreasonable to say, I'm going to create a Kickstarter campaign and I'm going to raise, we'll call it $2 million for my whole thing. Now that doesn't get me the whole flight, but it gets me a long way there, and that gets me enough to create my nanosat, maybe have additional payloads on this thing, and possibly pay for the whole thing. So that's why we're excited about it, because it could potentially open up an entire new industry that we hadn't actually seen before, because it's so expensive to get into space today. Where do you see that industry going?
Look, I could give you a business card from Rocket Lab, Benjamin. I think you described it extremely well. I mean, that's the whole point of what we're doing, is to make space accessible for everybody.
who would you be your main clientele, right? So would it be the Kickstarters, or I mean, I assume you'll fly for pretty much anyone, but you've got to have a vision of like, oh, these are the people that we think would fly. Who do you think those people are?
Well, we've run this project completely in the dark for the last year because there's nothing worse than a animation and no hardware to prove you're real. So we ran this program, like I say, dark for a year until we reached the point that we felt, okay, we've done enough. We're going to get there, so we'll talk about it. And we were completely unprepared for the interest that we've received, and we can't get our launch contracts into shape fast enough to meet the requirements. And we have people talking to us from the large historical aerospace defence contractors through to kids on the ground with a CubeSat. It's just been overwhelming.
It's pretty freaking awesome. We're really, really excited. Where can people go for more information from now until you start launching?
Just check our website out, which is rocketlabusa.com, and we'll post new news. And if anybody is looking for a really exciting time down in New Zealand to come and join this program with us, then we'd love to see your CV.
And before I let you go, I am supposed to ask you how much number 8 wire is used in the rocket.
Oh, that's my number one pet hate, is that New Zealand saying, because there is no number 8 wire in a launch system, that's for sure.
All right, awesome. Hey Peter, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk with us live today. And like I said, Rocket Lab, we're really excited about what you're doing and wish you the best of success. When we come back, we're going to be talking about comments from our last week's show. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome, future patrons of Tomorrow. If you're not familiar with who Tomorrow is, we're a live weekly webcast about the cosmos and human exploration of the stars. We'll feature things like rocket launches, we'll have guest interviews, we'll have amazing conversations about the cosmos, and of course an interactive chat room so that you can not only talk with other like-minded cosmic explorers, but also us, the hosts of the show, as well. And we're just generally excited about humans exploring space, and we're here on Patreon as a way to crowdfund the show itself, because this isn't something that a normal network would pick up, but it is something that a lot of us are really, really excited about. For those of you not familiar with Patreon, think of it like a recurring Kickstarter, a way for you to contribute to the show, but on a per episode basis instead of just once. You can contribute whatever amount you feel fit for these episodes, but once you start hitting that $1 mark, we're going to start giving rewards back to you. At $1, you'll get your name in the credits. At $5, you'll get your name in the credits. Plus, you're going to get a exclusive Google Hangout. At $10, you get even more stuff. Contribute what you feel is fair. Now, you know what I said, this is on a per episode basis, and we do have more than one episode per month. So if you want to make sure that you don't spend too much money per month, you can set an upper level cap. For example, you can contribute $5 per episode, but no more than $25 per month. Or you can contribute $1 per episode, but no more than $10 per month, whatever fits your budget. And if you'd like to see where your crowdfunded contributions are going, check out our goals. We're always getting new equipment. We're trying to do cool new things with social media. We're trying to do some amazing things in this space. And each goal helps us get closer and closer to realizing one of those new things. With the help of you, our patrons, we can make this show truly something special. And let me be the first to welcome you to Tomorrow. And welcome back to Tomorrow. Before we get into comments from our last show, I did want to give a huge thank you to all our patrons of Tomorrow. Now, these are the people who have contributed at least $3 or more, the Patreon Plus members, to this specific segment of this show. And this list keeps growing larger and larger and larger. And we also have people who have contributed $1, and the people who've contributed $1 are, there you go, just the patrons of Tomorrow. A huge thank you to them as well. Every single dollar helps. You can get more information at patreon.com/TMRO. TMRO. Now that list isn't $1 or more. That entire list was just people who are contributing $1. So a huge thank you to all our patrons who are helping to continue to support the show. All right, let's get started with some comments from our last week's show. Speaking of Patreon, this one was on the Patreon feed from Jan. We'll leave it at Jan. I have no idea how to pronounce that last name, but I'm terrible with that, and you guys love me for it, so there you go. So go ahead, take it away.
Regarding human exploration, I think Mars and Moon have different challenges and benefits. We should have different teams working on a plan to establish permanent presence on both. I believe that people work better when they work on something they like. If we choose only one over the two, I think that we will have people who will either say, I will do other stuff, or I will work for going there, but deeply inside we are doing wrong. Otherwise, if there was only one destination to go because of the amount of money we can put in, I think that we should wait to see the cost of reusable rockets first.
So basically, doing one or the other isn't necessarily correct. We
Right.
want to, it makes sense to do both or all of the things. Yeah, but you need to focus somewhere, right? You're not going to just go out and start everything. We can do all of them, but maybe we should start with something and then
Right.
move to something else, and then move to something else.
Well, I think it kind of depends on who the we is, right? So
I think
NASA can
I'm
do
using
one,
it as
SpaceX
humanity.
can do one. Sure, I think as humanity we can do more than one at a time. I don't see really an issue with that.
I don't know. Have we figured out even one?
No.
I mean, I think it takes all of humanity. No, that's very Minnesotan of you.
No.
I think as
I feel
humanity.
very strongly about it.
Humanity hasn't even figured out how to go to the moon. We don't even know how to stay on Mars. I'm sorry. We haven't figured out how to go to Mars. We haven't figured out how to go to the moon and stay there for a long
Right,
time.
right.
So while we could have an entity go to the moon, like NASA,
Right.
It might take the entire world to figure out how to stay there. I don't know.
It might, I suppose.
This one comes from David, also on Patreon.
I think that our residential colonies will stay within the inner solar system, and most of them will be artificial. Our industrial colonies will gradually propagate outwards in the solar system until they reach into the Kuiper Belt. The starting point will be the moon.
That's an interesting concept of you don't need to necessarily start on the moon or Mars. You can
Right.
start with we already have, essentially. We have the International Space Station, but I think he's thinking more of the, I cannot remember the name of it, but the giant looping space stations that go around.
Oh,
They have
yeah.
a name from the author, and I
Beautiful.
don't remember. It'll come to me later tonight.
Right.
But they're huge. They're mammothly huge.
Right.
You could start with something like that as an off-world ship of sorts, and then kind of
Right.
use that as a launching platform to other places, which is not necessarily a bad idea.
No.
Although getting them, you look at the International Space Station and the usable volume, and it's tiny. Now that might be where Bigelow comes into play.
Right.
But yeah. So interesting concept.
Yes.
This one comes from David.
We should go to the moon first. Aside from the obvious benefits of being much closer to Earth and having abundant solar exposure, the regolith on the moon contains vast resources that can be used to begin space-based manufacturing and kickstart further colonization efforts throughout the solar system.
All right, yeah. So, the concept of going to the moon before Mars, while we have been to the moon, I think a lot of people a lot of the space industry is like, well, we've done the moon, we've been there, let's go to Mars. That's the new big thing.
Right.
But we really only put flags and footprints on the moon. We didn't actually stay there, and we
Right.
haven't been back.
That's
so,
like you're taking a cross-country trip across the U.S., for instance. You're driving from California to New York. You happen to drive through Kentucky, and you say, oh, I've been to Kentucky. If you didn't stop there, you didn't live there, you didn't, even buy the postcard, it doesn't really count, man. You quite literally, sure, you've been there, but you haven't experienced it. You haven't really figured out quite literally the landscape of the area.
I think even the concept that we thought, even Buzz Aldrin thought there was nothing on the moon. He's like, magnificent desolation. Why are we going back? There's nothing there. We've been there.
Right.
Well, actually, there is stuff there.
There's a lot of stuff there.
There's tons of water there that we didn't even know about.
Right.
Although how much water we don't know because we haven't been back. So it's hard for us to say for certain.
Right.
But yeah, there is stuff on the moon, and there is things to be learned, and while what you learn on the moon may not necessarily 100% translate to getting to Mars,
Right.
and what you need to know to live and survive
Well,
on
it's
Mars, because they
stepping
are
stones.
very different. There are lessons to be learned
Yeah.
there, and how to live off-world. And I think one of the key things about the moon versus Mars is that on the moon, you have an emergency platform,
Right.
in that you can get there in 3 days.
Right.
if something goes wrong on the moon, you have a chance of surviving. A human could potentially, depending upon what the issue is,
Right.
a human could potentially survive for 3 days in a critical situation, and then we could rescue them. Mars is a totally different situation.
Right.
You got like 2-point-something year launch windows. I mean, the amount of time to get there is the better part of a year. You know, if you have a critical situation, you are completely and totally on your own. So on the moon, you're mostly on your own.
Right.
And so it's that stepping stone mentality,
Mostly.
right?
Yeah.
You kind of you're off world. You're kind of learning. Okay, we kind of have support, but kind of not really.
Right.
Can we really do this on our own? Is it totally
Should
self-sufficient?
I just skip the 2 next comments because you basically just blew right through those?
Oh no! Well, let's do the next comments anyhow, and then we'll talk about how I just blew right through them anyhow. So,
Okay.
all right, go ahead. This one comes from.
Martian in a human's body.
And that's a clever username. This one's
It
on
did take me
Reddit,
a
by the
moment,
way.
Yes. Mars has the best conditions to support a colony that becomes self-sufficient. Cloud cities on Venus are fun, but lack of resources to be able to expand. Terraforming is also much more difficult. The moon would have a large development, though, as its close location allows a lot of uses, but it's too hostile for a colony to support itself. But tourists will most certainly go to the moon because of how close it is.
Yeah, that's another interesting point, is that you can use the money from the moon to figure out how to pay for Mars. Because you
Right.
could start tourism on the moon. And actually, that's one of the goals of the show when we first founded 6 years ago. Well, we said, and I still mean, we want to do live broadcasts from the surface of the moon with the Earth in the background, which will require very particular planning about where we place the studio, because things don't move that much. So it's going to be
just
somewhat.
end up taking
You
a
gotta kind of.
picture.
Yeah, just
It's gonna be
it'll be a
backdrop
green
anyway.
screen.
Sorry.
We'll broadcast from the moon, so it'll be real, but it'll be a green screen.
Picture of Earth,
That's
yeah.
terrible. That's
Yeah.
terrible. Yeah. The cloud cities on Venus are fun, although there are resources there. There's a bunch of stuff in the clouds that you
Yeah.
can scoop up and use. Yeah, absolutely. All right, Nuke Dan from Reddit.
Says, it makes a lot of sense to create orbital colonies first. At the start, the primary benefit is proximity to Earth. It's much easier to troubleshoot and tweak emerging technologies from a reachable distance. Also related to proximity is safety. When some system crashes or an unforeseen catastrophe hits, escape pods can be used to return from orbit. Not so with Martian or lunar bases.
Well, I mean, that's true-ish, right? You can still have it's true-ish. You can still have escape pods. They're just much larger on the Martian surface, unless you've got some sort of orbiting outpost that you
Right.
kind of already set up in advance, that you
Right.
only have to go from the surface to the outpost, and then from the outpost back to Earth.
Right.
Or maybe you only need to make it to the outpost, and then you're safe for another year or two, or whatever
Right.
it is. I mean, there are ways around that on Mars. We can figure it out. It's not insurmountable. It's just, it feels like it's a little bit easier and safer to do it on the moon first. And maybe the cautious approach is the wrong approach. I mean, speaking out of the other side of my mouth, maybe the harder stuff is better to do because it is harder.
Right.
And because it is so much more difficult, that what we'll get out of it will be so much faster. I mean, there's something to be said for that. So,
There is.
next.
Christian says, I'm heavily ambivalent on this question. On one side, I wish we did damage control and kept our stupidity, wars, laws, artificial division, safely confined on Earth so that they die with us and the planet. But on the other side, the drive for discovery and new experience is what makes civilization survive and thrive. It is also extremely cool and inspiring. That was from YouTube.
Yeah, so certainly humanity has faults, right? Wars, hatred, just petty things that in the grand scheme of the universe don't matter and we fight over.
Right.
Some people even say that, we're killing the planet. That's not really true. The more truthful statement is we're killing ourselves.
Right.
The planet will survive just fine.
Right.
It's just going to eject us from it because we will no longer be able to sustain our life on the planet. It
Right.
will exceed what the human body can tolerate. Eventually, the planet will die. It'll be all things die, right? So that's just the universal truth. All things die, and the planet will die too. Most likely not by our hand, although I suppose possible if technology gets to that point. Anyhow, point is, we do have kind of our bad stuff,
Right.
but there's good stuff too, and there is this yearn to explore and this becoming better than we were before kind of mentality, and taking the best of the best and moving them forward, and the best of the best and moving them forward. I mean, that's who we are and what we do. So why do we need to wait? I guess my question is, why do we need to wait for future generations to do this stuff? Why can't we be the best of the best and start this momentum and start this movement and get us to the moon, get us to Mars? And I don't believe it should be either or.
Right.
I think it should be both, but you have to start somewhere. So the real question here from last week was, where do we start? Right. So there you go. I went like this on that topic, but whatever. I'm allowed.
Final comment from Michael, also from YouTube. The moon should be our first step for many reasons, but perhaps the most important is because everyone can actually see it. Just imagine the impact and inspiration such a nightly reminder would have on all of humanity.
Now, I added this in because we have talked about this before, and that has been your opinion.
I as soon as I read that, I was like, I've been saying that for years.
You have been. In fact, you have been saying that for years.
Why don't you say, quote, Carrie Ann. From, tomorrow.
From tomorrow. Well, that doesn't quite work.
Why? I'm going to say that tomorrow, too.
So describe why, though. I mean...
particularly when we made we started the show, we were living in Minnesota, and then...
Oh, you betcha.
Oh, yeah, you betcha.
Oh, yeah.
And as a child, I actually had moved a couple of times, and I had this reaction, the same reaction I had when we moved here to California, which was, I can no longer see my family on a regular basis. Now, above and beyond that, there's no single point in California where I can get up to the top of the highest mountain and look out and see Minnesota. I don't have that visual connection anymore, and oddly enough, it's weird, and it's kind of heartbreaking, and it's hard. It's not easy by any means, but if they were to move, or if we were to move, probably more likely, to the moon, I could still look out from the moon and see Earth. Or anyone on Earth can still look out pretty much every single night. Pretty much. I was accurate there. And look up and see the moon. And there's just something very ingrained in us. Forget about the stars and wanting to be out there and all of those fun things, but being able to look up and see where your family is, or your friends, or your company, or anything along those lines. There's just something very animalistic, deep down lizard brain that makes that sort of connection. And that would be crazy.
There is something unique about, imagine living in the Apollo era where we had astronauts on the moon, and you step out that night, you look up on the moon, and you realize for the first time humans are there. And now take that a step further, and you've got the crescent of the moon. If there's enough light, if there's enough civilization up there, you might actually be able to vaguely make out, I don't know if this is realistic, but vaguely make out the lights in the cities on the moon. That will be kind of cool.
It's very impactful.
That will be kind of cool.
When that's real, it's so crazy impactful. I
yearn for the day when children look up and that's just the way the moon is, and it has always been
like
them,
that for them.
Right? It's not a big deal to them. There's just a colony on the moon, or colonies on the moon. That's just normal, and that's how you get to Mars.
Right.
Right? You go up to that one and you jump over there. It's just a stop along the way, and that's how you get to wherever. Venus. That's how you get to the rest of the solar system. That's going to be really cool when that happens. All right, that's our. Oh, yeah, I'll save that for next week. That's our show for this week. I'd like to thank everyone so much for watching. If you, I completely lost my train of thought right there.
Okay,
that was amazing. We'll be back next week with more of tomorrow. That was it. If you're watching live, stay tuned. After Dark is up next. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Reddit/r/TMRO. Also, if you're a patron of Tomorrow on Reddit, let us know and we'll give you a little patron flair. It's pretty cool, pretty freaking cool. All right, let's go ahead and get started with some space news. Check this out. Rosetta finally reached Comet 67P. I'm not going to try to pronounce that. Those are high-res images from, what is it, like 60 miles, what's the distance? 96 kilometers or so, ahead of the nucleus of and there are more images, Dutta. Just keep going. Like the next one, there you go. Yeah, absolutely. So these are all taken a couple days apart. The first one was like today. Rosetta reached it at August 6th at 0900 hours Universal Time, and man, this has been going on for like 10 years. Check that out. Check that out.
So
it's a high-res image of the surface of this comet, and it looks a lot like the moon, I think. Right?
Yeah.
It's missing like all the ice, all the things we thought it was going to have.
Right.
It looks totally different than we thought it was going to. So we're going to be able to do some pretty amazing. We being humanity, specifically ESA, the European Space Agency, is going to be able to do some pretty amazing science based on what they have here. Check this out. Anytime Rosetta sends back imagery or anything else, they have to wait 22 minutes for telemetry because it's currently 245 million miles away. I should have converted that to kilometers. I'm a terrible human being. I'm sorry. That was a $1.7 billion spacecraft, and if all goes well... Coming up, Rosetta finally makes it to 67P.
SpaceX settles in Texas.
And we have a live interview with Peter Beck of Rocket Labs USA. Stay tuned. Tomorrow begins now.
Oh, it's beautiful, Mike. Got the flag up now, and you can see the stars
Private space station.
And welcome to Tomorrow, episode 7.24 for August 9th, 2014. My name is Benjamin Higginbotham. With me, as always, is the beautiful, lovely, wonderful, and talented Carrie Ann Higginbotham. We'll be your hosts for this episode. Now, before we get started, we did want to give a huge thank you to all of the patrons of Tomorrow. These are the people who have contributed at least $10 to this specific segment of this episode. Notice the list keeps getting longer and longer. That is super freaking awesome. We recently just got our pass through our last Patreon goal, and we are on fire to hit our next goal. And by the way, before we get into the show, the goals are kind of up for grabs. So the $1,000 and the $1,500 markers, if you have better ideas for those goals, please let us know. There's some great conversation happening on our Reddit channel, our Reddit subreddit, Air Force Station. The previous record was 34 days on the same pad within the last 10 years or so, right? Within the last decade. And that record was also held by SpaceX.
Yes.
Now, the previous record to that was actually on pad 17A, and that was 17B, and that was 41 days. Then we have pad 41, which is the, it's either the Atlas or Delta pad, I don't remember which, and that's 42 days. And then we've got pad 17A, which is 53 days, pad 37, which is 72 days in between launches. So if you look at the Atlas and Delta, they're basically 42 days and 72 days in between. So 42 days would be the Atlas launch. So 41 is Atlas and 37 is Delta 4. That's 72 days in between launches. And SpaceX has that down to 22, soon to be 21, hopefully. Now, that is not the fastest ever at Cape Canaveral. That actually belongs to Gemini 6 and 7 at Space Launch Complex 19, although back in the day it was actually just known as Launch Complex 19.
Right.
And that happened with an 11-day turnaround, and it technically...
Unbelievable.
So it was less than that, really.
Right,
so it was 11-day turnaround from launch to launch, but the pad was actually ready before then because they had to they had a test or they had an abort on one of the launches. So it was actually a faster turnaround than 11 days. Now, in all fairness, it was a slightly smaller rocket, so not as complex, but still 11-day turnaround. Challenge SpaceX.
Wow.
Turn that pad in 10 days. I can turn that pad in 10 days. That's the...
I'm like, turn that pad. That reminds me of.
A little bit.
Goodness.
That next launch of AsiaSat 6 is slated for August 25th. Speaking of SpaceX, they've officially selected, for realsies, there's been rumors about this.
No, I think technically there's still some paperwork that needs to be signed.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's like one sheet that's like somebody needs
I don't
to
know.
do, but I'm pretty sure it's still one.
Everywhere I've heard, it's like, this is for realsies now.
Right.
SpaceX has selected Brownsville for its next launch site. Here's approximately what it will look. I mean, they're done, right? I mean, you see the Falcon Heavy on the pad.
Yeah, I mean, there it is.
There it is.
I mean,
right
why
there.
isn't anyone talking about this, you guys?
This is an artist rendition of what it will look like. And actually, to give you an idea as to where this is, This is at the very tip point. So there's Texas, right? So there you can kind of see the outline of Texas at the very, very bottom. And if we zoom in even one more time, we can check out. So it's like the tippy end of Texas, and then the tippy end of that.
Yeah, it's almost the most southern point of Texas. I mean, it is basically the most southern point of Texas, that right on the water, if that makes any sense.
And that's kind of an outline of what that's all going to look like with the launch site and the hangars and kind of the launch complex. So that's kind of exciting. It's going to be in Boca Chica Village. It's near Brownsville. It's not in Brownsville. And this has been a long time. We've been talking about this for a while. There were certain sites up for grabs. This was always kind of the forerunner, it felt like. And now they've really made it official.
I mean, it makes sense. It's along the same latitude.
What is it? November of this year, there's going to be a lander that pops off and will land on the surface and will actually gather imagery and more data that way. That's going to be really freaking cool, and that's slated for later this year, November of this year. November 11th, there you go. So, yeah, that's going to be freaking awesome. All right, moving right along, SpaceX launched Asia Sat 8. Check it out.
3, 2, 1. Liftoff.
Now, that was a communications satellite for AsiaSat. Then, in fact, the next satellite that SpaceX is going to launch on Falcon 9, which is like less than 20 days away at this point, will be AsiaSat 6, also part of the same constellation. The neat thing about this particular launch was the pad turnaround time. So they're at Space Launch Complex 40 in Cape Canaveral. Now, for the last 20 years or so, no one has been able to turn a launch that quickly at the same launch pad.
Right, which is an important note, because some things have been turned around very quickly, but it's because it was one pad and then launching again on another pad.
Correct. So looking at this was a 22-day turnaround from the previous launch. And that was an Orbcomm launch. So Orbcomm launched, and then 22 days later, AsiaSat 8 launched. The previous record at the Cape Canaveral